Hello everyone, welcome, and thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Andy DeVale. I'm a principal consultant with Emergn. I've been with the company for just over 4 years. At Emergn, we strive to help companies change the way they work forever. And today we're joined by Tom Mead and Michael Marshall from Registers of Scotland, who'll be talking about how our work with them over the last year or so has helped them exceed their targets. 4 ways to turn around IT services, performance, and culture. Tom, Michael, firstly, thanks for joining us and taking the time to share your experience. Before we get started, it would be great if you just quickly introduce yourselves to the attendees, your role, and what you do at Registers of Scotland. Tom, maybe you could start.
Sure, Andy. So I'm the Digital Director at Registers of Scotland. So that encompasses all activities that a CIO would have, but also leading a large digital transformation. My background is I'd done a number of digital transformations in other organizations, most recently the Student Loans Company, which was the first to align with GDS in implementing the government's digital strategy.
Great, thanks Tom. Michael?
Hello, I'm Michael. I am a team lead within the IT service department at Registers of Scotland. We look after maintaining all the applications and systems that are in service, making sure we have optimal uptime and availability.
Great, thanks. Now, just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Firstly, for everyone to have the best experience, I'd like to ask, for those of you who haven't already, to mute your phones or microphones. Thank you very much. The presentation today will last around 30 minutes, and we'll follow that with a 15-minute Q&A session. If you do have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question box on the right-hand side, and we'll answer as many as we can in the Q&A. We'll also be sharing contact details, so if you want to follow up with any of us afterwards, you feel that you're free to do so. Additionally, we'll also be sharing a recording should you wish to recap or share with colleagues. So without any further ado, let's get started. Tom.
Okay, thanks Andy. So I'll maybe give you a little bit of background on Registers of Scotland before I start. So Registers of Scotland maintains about 17 registers, the number of which are live and some are more ceremonial. The largest of the registers that we have is the land register. So anytime that a house is bought or sold or built, it needs to be registered, its title needs to be registered. And there's quite a lot of mapping and there's quite a lot of legal definition that needs to go into that. Registers had a 10-year outsource contract with a large systems integrator, which went south after about 8 years. Didn't really work out for Registers and didn't really work out for the systems integrator either, so they parted ways. And after that, there was quite a bit of turnover in IT management before I arrived, so I was into a little bit of a hot seat. What we were left with was a huge amount of technical debt. We have a number of different aging systems, 20 years plus. They're not really fit for purpose. They really inhibit the ambitions of our business, and they make a lot of our processes very inefficient. So no matter what kind of efficiency we try to make on the business side, we're really hampered by very, very poorly integrated and very clunky old systems, some of which have over 1 million lines of code in them. So quite a bit of a challenge to face into. In addition to that, because we had our ambition kind of foiled for quite a long time through the relationship that we had before and the complexity of our systems, I had an extremely impatient executive management team who thought that I was already 10 years behind in delivering a transformation for them. So I knew that we were going to have a huge amount of work coming down the line, and I needed to do an assessment of where we were. So I'm not sure if anybody's a football fan. I am. I'm not a Liverpool fan, but I think they maybe give a decent enough analogy of where we were. So Liverpool were famously playing AC Milan in the European Champions League final in Istanbul, and at halftime they found themselves 3-0 down. And that's a little bit where I felt we were with IT service, because we had a huge amount of work going on, and we knew with the digital transformation coming down, it was only going to get harder. So how are we going to face into the second 45 minutes? So just to give you a background of what this state of affairs was, we used to, in the year that I started, we completed 3 software releases in the entire year. It used to take us 3 days of downtime to complete a release. That's 3 days of all systems being down, so no registration happening. We used to primarily do them over weekends, but because our systems were quite inefficient in our processes, it meant that oftentimes we would use weekends for overtime to catch up on things. So it meant that any time that we did a release, we were eating into that overtime capability. For one of our major releases, it actually took us 6 days of downtime to complete. And during that time, none of our web services, none of our registration services would be running. Not surprisingly, it used to cost us a lot to do a release. It cost us approximately £25,000 to do each release, between regression testing, between IT service people being available to try and get a release through. The last one of those 3 major releases that we did resulted in 411 live defects being found after the release. So quite a few and quite a bit of technical debt for us to run through for a number of months after the release. And again, that really affects our service provision and affects the already under pressure IT service function. On top of these releases, we had in 2013 to 2014, we experienced 110 hours of downtime on our internal registration systems. So that's when our systems aren't available to our registration staff. It costs us about £18,000 per hour to staff up our registration services. So 110 hours of downtime equates to about £1.6 million of cost to the organisation. We had 132 supplier contracts to try and manage across IT. And in our service desk, 30% of our calls were resolved by the service desk. 70% were passed on to our already exacerbated IT service staff to try and resolve. And the final number for you to bear in mind is that supporting all of this, we had 59 people in IT service. So there were some things that we needed to do. I had an impatient executive management team, as I say, waiting for change to happen. If I wanted change to happen, I knew that I'd have to have IT service in a fit state to deliver. I'm an Agilist. I want to do regular releases. I want to release all the time. But if I don't have an IT service staff that can support that, it doesn't matter what you do on the development side. You won't be able to get things through. You won't get things accepted into service. If you've got poor change processes, you'll have problems. But also, if you're dealing with technical debt, you're going to have to keep diverting development staff to try and address that. So the objectives that we set when we wanted to engage Emergn was I wanted to increase the availability of our existing systems, and I targeted this at about 5%. So that's the 110 hours downtime that we used to have. I wanted to reduce the cost of creating environments and to do releases because I wanted to release frequently. I wanted to reduce the size of the IT services function over time. That wasn't really a primary driver, but it was something that I thought that we probably had quite a bit of inefficiency in there. I wanted to establish a sustainable continuous improvement mindset, so I don't want to just do a sharp shock and get something changed. I want to continuously change. I want to keep changing. And I wanted to improve the responsiveness of IT service and its reputation. So not just in serving IT development, our primary service is in serving our customers primarily and also the business. So 110 hours of downtime isn't good enough. 70% of service calls being passed on to other people to deal with isn't good enough. So what we looked at with Emergn was we looked at a combination of a number of things. We wanted coaches to work with us on site, so we brought in 2 coaches to work with us for a year. Michael will tell you quite a bit about that. We wanted to have a mix of how we learned, so we had experiential learning, we had problem-based, and we had plenty of problems to try and work through, and we had classroom learning. We established a technique library to try and help people in different ways to solve problems. Michael will again touch on some of that. And we also wanted to have industry accreditation. So obviously the VFQ training that Emergn has is backed by the British Computer Society. So value flow quality, VFQ, sums up pretty nicely what we wanted to do. We wanted to increase the value of what we were doing. We wanted to be able to deliver value early and often. We wanted to optimize the flow that we have through our organization, and look at different bottlenecks and look at the system as a whole. And we want to enhance quality, so we don't want to be dealing with technical debt. We want to deliver good quality first, and also software in a way that we can change it fairly rapidly without there being a large cost to change. So at this stage, I'll hand over to Michael, who I was maybe looking at things from the theoretical front. Michael had to deal with it at the coalface.
Okay, thank you, Tom. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Michael. As I say, I work in the service team. So Tom came to us, and he wanted to promote VFQ, and we agreed to all the things that he talked about. So we had to look at how in practice we could actually put them into action. So we agreed as an overall team to some evolutionary change. We agreed to some of the principles, so visualizing work, limiting our work in process to get the flow going so we could deliver early and often. We agreed to things like show and tells, reflection, continuous improvement, collaboration through stand-ups, and quite importantly on building teams as well. But it's important to see that, to look at how we actually got to this place in the first place. So from an IT service point of view, there's a very strong industry standard already out there, which is ITIL or ITIL, depending on your pronunciation preference. So it's been around for a long time. It's a government mandated thing. So if you work in government, it's everywhere. It's got a perception of working because it's pervasive. Everyone uses it. You go out and buy tools, and they all have a big stamp on them saying this tool is ITIL accredited or optimized for ITIL. And it self-promotes itself as the best practice for service management. So why would you not use it? And why would we have a problem with using it? So when you actually think about it, though, there's a number of problems with ITIL. As service teams now, we know that not all our customers want the same things. ITIL is based around standardization and repetitiveness. It's based around having standard catalog items. As soon as your customers move away from that, it becomes more difficult. It's based around having items that you know how to deliver. And again, the more that we're seeing consumerization of IT, the more that we're seeing IT being pushed out into areas of the business, or areas of the business taking more control than they used to have over their level of IT, the more that the requests they have become more bespoke, and the less that IT operations actually knows how to deliver a standard answer. So that means that our requests are not always predictable. And the teams overall move from mostly working on standardized requests to actually spending a good proportion of their time working on non-standard things. The other thing that happens is that IT service teams generally have a kind of sneaky under-the-radar approach to doing projects that kind of skips past a lot of the big project planning team, your program office or whatever else that most organizations have. So, as a service team, there's a lot of what we would call corporate IT. So that's your things like your mail server and your spam filtering and that kind of stuff that is not a big enough project. It's not something that the business sees as a strategic thing. And yet they are big projects in themselves whenever someone decides to upgrade a mail server or change out a web filtering system. So there's a lot of project work, bespoke, unique, one-off work that goes on within a service team that doesn't actually fall under the realm of ITIL in the first place. And lastly, we've got the slight myth that systems always break in the same way. So ITIL likes you to have a nice known fix for everything that goes wrong. In reality, that doesn't happen, and the more that you close off known fixes, the more complicated and complex the fixes become for things that break. So what can we do? Well, looking at the rest of Agile, our colleagues through in IT development, we look at them and we can see they've gone very, very Agile, and actually we see that they deliver a little bit of a project. They deliver a front door, probably half painted and with the letterbox missing. And they get loads of praise for that because someone goes, hey, that front door, brilliant. That looks good, we'll have that. Whereas in IT service, we're used to building the front door, the windows, getting the walls up, putting the roof on, making sure it's the right colour, wallpapering it inside, putting the blinds up, get a whole house out there. And we present the whole house, and your customers look at it and go, well, nah, didn't really want that house, wanted the one down the road instead. So we knew we needed to change. Our colleagues in development are very Scrum-based, but for a service department, that doesn't really work. It's too rigid. It's too based around timescales and pre-planning, and because of the reactionary nature of a lot of work in service, that doesn't really suit us. So with the help of Emergn, we looked at Kanban. Now, we did have a bit of resistance to Kanban. So when we first introduced Kanban, we hadn't really done any of the classroom-based learning. We hadn't really got any of the principles embedded. So there was some resistance. We had comments, along the lines of, we're just duplicating effort by shuffling the same tickets that we already have in our case management, in our service desk management software. All we're doing is writing them on a post-it note and shuffling them around the wall somewhere. We had people saying that in the time it takes to write a big, long, complicated story on a post-it note, they could have fixed the problem. So we're actually slowing down the team. And we had a lot of people questioning just how the actual Kanban process adds any value at all into how our service to the customer goes. So we realized fairly quickly that just following the motions of Kanban wasn't really good enough. You need your staff to understand the reasons that they're doing things, not just the way of doing it. So, working with Emergn, we obviously sent most of our teams on a classroom-based course, so that they were able to understand the real principles behind Kanban. And having done that, they then understand the way to do it. What we wanted to avoid was people just getting fixated on Kanban as the only tool they could use. We wanted to make sure that they didn't just simply take an existing process, draw it up on a board or visualize it on a wall, and then declare it to be the Agile method of doing it. And we wanted to make sure that, when people become disillusioned, it's very easy just to fall back into what If people have spent 5, 10, 15, 20 years working through an ITIL methodology, if you make things difficult for them, or if they don't see the benefit in changing, they will very quickly, and without realizing it subconsciously, just revert back to how they used to work. So it was very important for us to make sure that we chose the correct techniques that fitted into what we were trying to achieve. So looking at Kanban in particular, one of the principles that we really focus on with Kanban is the one of feedback. So we make sure that, having started with a board in a particular fashion and a set of rules of how that board works, we made sure that each of the teams owned their own Kanban board and felt that they were able, within the principles or within the bounds of the principles, to adjust the board as they felt fit. So there is no one-size-fits-all Kanban board. There is no magic solution that makes it work. It really comes down to each team making it work for themselves. So we allow teams to change the board as they see fit. And what has that meant? Well, we've seen a lot of improvements. So by constraining the work in progress, so by making sure that only a certain number of tickets can progress through the Kanban board at any one time, the throughput has increased. We're getting more tickets done. What that does is free up capacity to use on the more important stuff. So it means that we can have people working on more interesting project work than sitting around trying to shuffle service tickets. The teams were resistant, but by giving them the feeling of ownership and by allowing them to sort of meld the Kanban boards and the techniques to their own benefit, it's really allowed us to drive adoption of those techniques. So it almost becomes second nature now. So our teams, as soon as they get a new bit of project work in, the immediate first subconscious step is to look at that project and start breaking it down into smaller pieces that could be delivered incrementally rather than trying to look at the whole project as a single entity. The next thing we looked at was education. So I talked about classroom learning. We also did a lot of on the floor learning as well. So the coaches came in particularly useful for that. So we had a work-based program that can lead ultimately to certification through the British Computer Society. We tried to bring together the knowledge of all the different methodologies and principles. So whilst our service team are not working in a Scrum methodology, we know that our colleagues from development and from around the business in project management, they all are working in a Scrum methodology. So whilst we don't need to know necessarily how to do it ourselves for our own teams, it's very useful for the teams in service to understand how the rest of the business is operating. And likewise for them to understand how it's a slightly different way using Kanban that we are operating. So it's very important to get that cross knowledge. So I've got some examples on the slides of things that we did. So some of the techniques we chose have helped us to make really significant improvements to our processes. So using the technique of value stream mapping, we've been able to take our change process, which to begin with, and it's represented on the slide as the top 2 lines of post-it notes. That started as a 40-step process, very laborious. It contributed a lot to Tom's figure of £25,000 to make a release, because there was an awful lot of steps. Each of those steps has a cost obviously involved and a time lag. So we were able to use the value stream mapping technique to optimize that whole process. So we managed to reduce it from 40 steps in the top 2 rows down to 10 steps in that bottom row of post-it notes. So we've been able to make a really beneficial change there, which allows us to be much more flexible, much more agile, be much more reactionary. So, a standard change used to take anything up to about a week to get approvals through. We can now, if it needs to, we can have a change through in the same day. So it's really a huge difference. Again, the value stream mapping has allowed us to optimize effectively entire processes by identifying the parts of the process where there are bottlenecks. So in this process, it couldn't really be squashed down any further, but what we were able to do was look at the time flow through the process. So on the left, the first 50% or so of the process can be completed in 30 minutes. So trying to remove steps from that part is really not overly useful. However, the next 2 post-it notes in that process take 3 days to complete. So if we're going to spend effort trying to make that entire process more efficient, spending the effort on those 2 steps that take 3 days is going to have a much greater payback in terms of making that process faster and more customer friendly than spending time looking at the entire left-hand side of the process, which only takes 30 minutes anyway. So value stream mapping has been a very useful tool for us in order to allow us to optimize processes. We've also done a lot of work with collaboration and cross-functional working. So traditionally, a lot of IT service teams are very silo-based. So you traditionally have a network team, and you'll have a security team, and you'll have a storage team, and you'll have a desktops team, and you'll have a server team, and you'll have so on. So what we've tried to do is not only just break down the teams by rearranging the teams so that they're much more cross-functional, but also having retrospectives that cross team boundaries. So we regularly have retrospectives that cover our development teams and our service teams within the one retrospective, so that we can make sure that we both understand the pain points and the improvements that we could make in our interactions with each other, as opposed to just optimizing within our own little silo. So again, we've had to make some changes just to make that seem more attractive and more useful to people. So in the example here, to kind of make the process a wee bit more engaging, we actually gave everyone some betting chips and had them bet on the good points and the bad points that most frustrated them or encouraged them, and we were able to draw good actions from those that let us push the good things further and make more of those, and actually effectively deal with the worst of the bad points. We've also done a lot of work taking the continuous integration kind of principle from development and trying to apply that into service. So we don't really have in service, you don't have a continuous integration pipeline as development would have, but we can have a similar type idea. So continuous integration is all about automating the steps of deployment. It's about understanding if somebody checks in a bad piece of code that fails tests. It's about understanding where that's happened. Now, we're not so much checking in code changes, but we are checking in system changes. We're checking in changes to configuration or introducing new systems, taking systems out. So by taking the same principles, we've been able to take what was a fairly horrific daily checks process that involved manually checking a whole load of systems and doing that once as a single shot thing in the morning. We've been able to transform that into an automated, ongoing, continuous testing and continuously automated process that happens, every 5 minutes, every 10 minutes, every 15 minutes during the day. And that allows us to see if someone makes a change and it's going to break the build, so to speak, we're aware of that almost immediately. And the aim is to be aware of it before our customers are aware of it, so that we can either undo the change or a remediation before it comes out of hand, before anyone like Tom notices. So that again, this has had some real big improvements. So we've been able to identify issues. We've been able to vastly reduce the number of avoidable service outages, both by simplifying processes so that there's less steps to get wrong, and also by having much greater automation of testing so that we're able to identify very early on if something's gone wrong. We've been able to remove a lot of bottlenecks, which our customers perceive us as being slow. So by removing time bottlenecks, especially out of processes, although we're doing nothing differently in terms of what we do, to our customers we seem a lot more responsive and agile. And through the team retrospectives, we're continuously using that feedback loop to find actionable improvements, not just within our own service teams, but actually we're trying to optimize across the whole of IT so that we can find actionable improvements that everyone can make. And by communicating them out, other teams can understand the improvements we've made and whether they would be able to make the same improvements as well. So we've used a couple of other techniques. I'll just breeze through these very quickly. So we've used a technique called 5S. 5S is about workplace arrangement and efficiency. So we've used that on our data center. Hopefully everyone's data center doesn't look like I was used to, but I've been in a fair few, and I know that there's a lot out there. So we inherited a data center that really was not particularly tidy, and we used the 5S process to make a real difference there. So 5S is really about sorting your data center, making sure everything's got a place, and then standardizing those places. So we wanted to go from the situation on the left to the situation on the right. The situation on the left, it really is what our data center looks like. And, without having to do an awful lot to tidy that up, culturally people will change the way they do things. So without ever having to explain 5S to somebody, if a network engineer walks into the situation on the left with the messy cables and no clear standards, they're just going to add to that mess without a second thought. They'll just put a cable in, walk away. If they walk on into something that's beautifully tidy, such as the situation on the right, they're just subconsciously going to keep it that way. There's no need for them, they're not even going to think any other way. They're not going to question it. They will keep it neat. and that's extended through the whole of the data center. So again, to break down team barriers, we've used we have one team that kind of looks after the data center and another team that looks after the software running on the servers. So by having the two teams cross over, we came up with a system of adding tags onto the physical servers so that one team is able to communicate to the other team the expected end of lives or utilities or other natures of those servers, so that the people who manage the data center can actually manage it far more effectively. We've used the five whys process extensively to look at issues. So this is a particularly complicated one, but we've discovered that it's far more important to dig down past your surface issue, understand the chain of events that led to that issue, and then actually resolve the root causes, as opposed to trying to just fix the surface. So you can saw the top off an iceberg, but there's an awful load of things under the water. And in fact, the things under the water is what's going to sink your boat, not the things above the water. So 5S has allowed us to spot things that are out of place, minimize their downtime, and as a side fact, we find that people have much more pride in their workplace now. By showing that things can be good and can be neat and can be efficient, people have a much more buy-in to actually make that happen themselves. Lastly, and very quickly, as was alluded to, we've attempted to have as many people become certified as possible. The exam is not easy, but it does really focus you on the principles, which then allows you to apply those principles to areas that are not specifically called out in the book. So it really lets you manage your teams a lot better. We've established some champions who will go around the teams that are struggling a wee bit with VFQ. We've used them to reach out into the rest of the business as well to sell the VFQ idea and to allow other parts of the business, such as HR, such as the project management office, to understand how they interact with us now. And we now have a couple of people who are trained up to be able to deliver a one-day fundamentals course, so that we make sure that every new employee who comes into Registers of Scotland within our IT function, within a short period of joining ROS, has a one-day overview of the basic principles and the important points to note. So on this point, I'm going to hand back to Tom.
Thank you, Michael. So you'll have a bit of what's maybe coming up, or how we've been getting on. The graph here on this next page, actually, guys, can you click me on? Yeah, okay, thank you. So this gives you a trend of what's happening with our major incidents. If you see in October 2013, we had 18 major incidents in that month. There are probably about 20 working days in that month, so it's almost a major incident a day. Our trend has been going down. We didn't include the latest quarter, but it's been going down quite significantly since that. So that gives you an idea of the overall trend. But if we move on to the next slide, I can show you I can start to give you a view of where we are. Okay, so I think we've got over the glitch. I think I've got control again. So if we bring ourselves back to Istanbul, where are we now? We haven't got into overtime. We haven't won the trophy yet. I think we've pulled it back to about 3-3. We've done a lot of really good stuff. There's a lot of really good things that we still want to do. So to give you a reminder of some of the numbers that we had before, we had 3 releases completed in the year that I arrived. Last year we completed 52. It used to take us 3 days downtime to complete a release. We now don't have downtime when we do most releases. Some releases might take a system down for a short period of time. Most releases have no downtime at all. It used to cost us £25,000 to do a release. It now costs us about £500 in total to do a release. We had 411 live defects after our last big release of 2014. We've had more functionality released over the last year than we had in that year, and we've had 12 live defects on our systems after those releases, after all of them. The big one in terms of cost, I aimed, if you remember, to improve our service availability by 5%. We went from 110 hours of downtime actually down to 20 hours, so it was up over an 80% improvement. That's a benefit of £1.4 million just there. In terms of the releases that we've done as well, and being able to release as frequently as we have, we've actually been able to cut our forecasts we underspent by 1.1 million in the first 5 months of the transformation program. So we're delivering real cashable benefits to the business straight away. We had 132 supplier contracts. We're now down to 109. We're continuing to try and cut that down, not to get suppliers out, but because we just found quite a bit of waste across the different types of services that we had. Our service desk are now responding to 70% of calls directly themselves, so we've done quite a lot of what's called shift left, so shifting the responsibility directly to our service desk and upskilling them to be able to handle those. And we've done all of this with 10 fewer people in total. So it's quite an achievement by the team. This wasn't, we weren't looking for redundancies, we weren't looking for people to go. We did discontinue one or two large outsource contracts that we still had remaining, so that's cut our headcount by quite a bit. And the other thing is that some people just didn't like the new way that we were doing things. Maybe things were a little bit more visible, or the new culture didn't quite fit, and they didn't feel that they fit in it, so they decided to move on. So we've had that overall decrease, despite bringing in people with different skills. So that's kind of on your business as usual, but what that has done, by being able to put out some of the fires in our business as usual, we've been able to start doing some really big exciting things like Michael was talking about. So the 5S work has resulted in us decommissioning 286 servers from our computer room. So that's 62% of our asset register. We've also implemented an uninterrupted power supply. So we've got now all of our major systems are on UPS. That saved us twice this year already. We had two unplanned power cuts this year, so whereas that would have been a major business disruption issue for us previously, this year one of them happened without us even noticing. We are also in the process of implementing a new data center. So the old data center that Michael and his team are working so well in clearing out is going to become our secondary data center. We're now going to a shared service data center in Scottish Government in Saughton House, and we're implementing a private cloud there. So we're using vBlock by VCE. We've got that installed. We've got new network connections there. We've tested failover, and now we're just starting to migrate our systems across. We have a new building planned for Glasgow in October, so we're going to be moving about 220 people. So in order to be able to support that properly and to move to the type of office of the future, we're implementing virtual desktops across all of our staff, and we're going to be implementing unified comms. And we're not really breaking sweat about it. So looking at the combination of all of these work practices, mindset, has really allowed us to reach much further than we would have been otherwise. So Andy, I'll maybe pass back to you to see if there's any questions that people might want to ask.
That's great. Thanks very much, Tom and Michael. So we'll go ahead and take some questions. Now, just a reminder, if you have got any additional questions, please be sure to type your questions into the question box on the right-hand side, and we've got some that have been coming in here. I'm just going to have a look. So there's a question, can we get a copy of the presentation after the webinar? Yes, absolutely. We will be able to get that out to you. The next one here, let me just see. So we've got a question here, which is, have the business customers noticed the change? Tom, maybe you could take that one. What's been the response from the business customers?
Business customers, I'm assuming, meaning external to Registers of Scotland. So external to Registers of Scotland, we have much higher system availability of our services. We've been able to, I mentioned the technical debt that we carried over from the last release, so we've been able to implement a number of key improvements that our customers wanted. So we have been getting quite positive feedback on a number of those changes. I guess a lot of the changes that we do, in terms of service availability and that, a lot of them are the ones that people don't notice. So people don't notice systems going down anymore. They notice when a system is down, but they don't notice when a system isn't down, if you know what I mean. So we haven't been getting a huge amount of feedback on that, but internally the numbers have been very positive from my executive management team colleagues. They really understand the value of being able to do overtime whenever they want. They understand the value of the systems being up all the time. So there's been a very positive response there.
That's great. Thanks so much, Tom. And we've got another one here from Greg Love. So he's saying, hi, using continuous integration for service, did you employ any tools or technology to achieve that? Michael, that's probably one for you.
Yeah, so we discovered that we had a number of tools already. So, for monitoring our databases, we had tools like Oracle Enterprise Manager. We had SolarWinds for monitoring a lot of the server-side stuff. We had a lot of scripts we could write using PowerShell. So the ability to kind of monitor these things was there. What wasn't there was the visibility of when these scripts were doing things or when problems were detected. So we looked at a number of tools, and we chose a tool called SolarWinds Alert Manager, which just allows you to pull all your automated alerting into one console, and essentially you should view it on one big screen. So I think that's probably the most important point if you're looking to pull together continuous automation or continuous integration. It is quite difficult to find, especially from a service arena, one tool that will let you monitor or automate everything. What's far more important from our point of view is bringing all of that monitoring back into the one portal that everyone can look at and everyone can see in one glance when there's an issue.
Great, and just to finish off, because we're coming up to time now, we've got a couple of questions coming very much on the same theme. So the title of the webinar obviously referenced culture as well, so we've got a couple of questions here that tie more to that. So one was, has it had an impact on the overall morale, and also did we measure engagement of staff, and if yes, has it improved? So that's one maybe for you both to talk to. So
well, maybe sure. So maybe on the morale, from my point of view, I think it certainly has. I had an end of year review with our head of IT service, who's doing a contract position for 18 months, and he'll be moving on now. And he was reflecting on his time in IT service, and he said that when he started, that there was a palpable anger within IT service, is how he described it. We don't have that anger anymore. Now, we do have people who are busy, but one of the Agile principles is that you do things at a sustainable pace. When we were working in 2014, even though our throughput wasn't as high, our delivery of value wasn't as high, our service availability wasn't as high, but people were working much longer hours, or people were working overtime to do releases and that. That doesn't happen anymore. People work the regular hours, and I think people are quite a bit happier for that, and they're allowed to problem solve quite a bit more. Michael, you'll probably be able to give much more of a view on the feelings of people in the teams.
Yeah, I think you're right. 18 months, 2 years ago, people were working a lot, or perceived that they were working hard, very hard, all the time. And as I alluded to at the start of my slides, there was some negativity towards bringing in the VFQ principles. But that very quickly changed because of the feedback element, where people are able to kind of take their own destiny as to how their team operates, and actually improve processes and identify things that annoy them and do something about it. That very quickly allowed us to change the team morale around, so that people felt that they were actually in control of their own destiny almost, and teams were in control of their own destiny, and were given much more autonomous power to get on and do a job, as opposed to be given just a list of stuff to do and get on with it. So morale is definitely far better now than it was previously.
Exactly that. Actually, closing out the engagement, we did do that exit survey as well, and that brought out, there was a very strong messages about increased motivation and also collaboration across the teams and so on. That's great. Well, thank you very much. That's all the time we have for questions just now. And in fact, we've got through all those that were listed out. So just quickly, Tom, before we go, is there anything else you wanted to cover before we wrap up?
No, I guess the next thing for us is, I guess what we've done is a little bit unusual, is applying these kind of agile techniques in what's normally kind of a hands-off agile area. Operations is typically, you try to do the same thing in a very, very controlled manner, and as Michael said, that's not really the reality of operations anymore. Operations needs to be able to respond like development needs to be able to respond. What we are focusing on quite a bit more over the next year is, on an organization level, we're going to be looking quite a bit more at aligning our business around the services that we provide, and that's going to affect IT. So we will see IT service and IT dev people working more in DevOps, but that DevOps being absolutely aligned with what the different business services that we have are.
That's great. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Tom and Michael. And so, just losing control here. So, everyone, we appreciate you being here. Thanks again for joining us today. And we'll see you next time. So what's going to happen next is you'll receive an email tomorrow, which will give you a link to the recording. If you do want to discuss anything further that you've heard, please feel free to make contact. You've got your details here, and you'll also receive those. So thanks again for your time.